This is Marketing Uncomplicated. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today I have Sebastien Page. Most leaders think success is about working harder, pushing further, and doing more. But what if that's exactly what's holding them back? Today's guest has spent years studying the psychology behind leadership, and he's here to show us how to perform at a high level without burning out. Sebastien, welcome to the show. We're really happy to have you.
Sasha, I am fired up for this. I've been looking forward to it.
I also want to add that Sebastien is also the author of Psychology of Leadership, where he brings together sports psychology, which is a very interesting concept in terms of just how, sports relates to performance that can translate into leadership and so on and so forth. And we'll get into that. Real executive experience and practical frameworks to help readers actually sustain success. So let's dive into it. You didn't start out as the typical Wall Street leader. Can you walk us through your journey and how psychology became such a core part of your leadership philosophy?
I've been in money management for 25 years now. I started at the bottom of the ladder as an intern, and I've had a phenomenal career. Money management is a stressful job. No one can predict the future. There are tensions. It's sometimes combative, but I love it. I love the rough and tumble world of managing money and, in other words, managing risk. But I got to say, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was pretty stressed at work. And Sasha, not only was I stressed, I was also stressing about stressing, which is not a good state to be in. I was telling myself, why am I stressed? I've been doing this for 20-something years. I should be handling this better. And that's what started my exploration into the positive side of psychology. I ended up talking to a sports psychologist who lives in Maryland, where I am. Our first meeting was so fascinating that I ended up writing a book out of it, The Psychology of Leadership. I mean, it didn't happen overnight, but that was the spark. That was the spark. And I know, Sasha, you have a book coming out that's exciting. I bet you it didn't happen overnight either, I would guess.
No, not at all.
So at that moment, I sit down with the sports psychologist to talk about the fact that I'm stressing about stressing. His name is Dr. Daniel Zimmett. He is a PhD psychologist. He helps top athletes, Major League Baseball players, NFL players, Olympic athletes, and so on. But what's super interesting about him is that he's an athlete himself.
Oh, I love that.
He has 40 national titles in the sport of handball. Now, if you're familiar with squash, handball is kind of like squash, but you use your hands to, you whack the ball directly with your hands. It's a really interesting sport. So we sit down. I ask him about sports psychology and positive psychology. I know nothing. I'm a finance money management nerd. He decides that he's going to tell me the story of the best match he ever played as an athlete. It's remarkable because, Sasha, he remembers everything about the match, and it was 10 years prior.
Unbelievable.
He's telling me point by point what happened. Point 6, the ball hit that wall, then it hit that wall, and there's emotion. And he gets to a point where he's making an extreme shot. He's on his knees, and he makes the shot, and the crowd goes crazy, and I'm on the edge of my seat listening to his story about his best handball match ever that took place 10 years prior. But then it's the biggest letdown because in a nonchalant way, he just goes, then I lost the next 2 points. And I go, what? You lost that match? That was what he wanted to explain to me. As a sports psychologist, it didn't matter at all that he lost that match. He cherishes that match for a simple reason, because in that court, at that moment, he played to the best of his abilities. And he realized that from then on, he was able to play the game at a higher level. In sports psychology, there's a difference between ego and mastery. And in the psychology of leadership, I bring this to business. Ego versus mastery. He was explaining to me the reason why this was his best match was that he's completely interested in mastery, in getting better at the sport. And the ego effect of losing that match meant nothing to him. He just realized that day, I'm a better player. We started talking about this. I went into a rabbit hole of research, reading papers about it, and eventually writing little by little. And it culminated in an exploration in positive psychology, sports psychology, and also super interesting personality psychology. So here we are.
Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. I love that. Ego and leadership, you said?
Yeah, ego versus mastery, and how that,
Mastery.
how does that apply to leadership, right?
Yes, yes. I want to dig into that because there is the high level concept that everybody knows, or at least people that are working towards the betterment of themselves have obviously heard the word ego, right? Have heard about their internal ego, have heard about the sabotage that ego can do for you, and so on. But from this standpoint and from this angle of like ego versus mastery, I'm very curious about it because I haven't heard it put that way. And I kind of think I understand the direction that you're going in. But can we break that down a little bit? Because it is a very interesting concept, and then even further as you drive it into leadership, because as we talked earlier in the beginning when I was introducing you, there is a nice bridge between sportsmanship and bringing that kind of build up and that sentiment, and who you are on the field versus who you are outside of the field, which is the same thing, who you are inside work and as a leader versus who you are outside. So let's please unpack that portion of it.
Let, yeah, let me start with the sport example because that concept is covered in the sports psychology literature.
Yes.
Simply compare two golf players, one who's obsessed with the trophies, the score, the handicap. She brags to her friends about her handicap. That's clearly an ego oriented player. By the way, at the very top level, there are ego oriented players. Now let's talk about a mastery oriented player.
Yeah.
She gets home and she tells her husband, today I improved my swing and I am fired up and excited because my swing got better.
Yeah.
See the difference between the ego and mastery orientation? Ultimately, the very top athletes, when they seek mental game coaching,
Yeah.
develop this mastery orientation. We all have both, just to be clear. We all have an ego, okay? But
Everyone
if you can
does.
find a balance and increase your mastery orientation, it can make a world of difference. Let me bring this to business now. In
One
business,
second,
we
let
want to
me
have,
let me
yeah,
plug in just for a second there from the ego versus mastery. It's almost like, and I don't know how much, being a European, that you watch American football, but Tom Brady talks a lot about this in
yeah.
terms of how he wasn't the perfect player. He wasn't the best player. But I think the mastery portion really speaks to him because he let go of his ego and pushed past that. I may not be the best, but if I show up and if I am diligent about my practice and I'm diligent about the play of the game, then I'm going to be the best, which is the same example almost that you gave earlier.
There's a tremendous, tremendous work ethic when it comes to Tom Brady, like
Yeah.
famously just obsessively practicing longer and more than everybody else.
Yeah.
I would venture that behind that, there is some level of satisfaction that is pure mastery, as you suggest. If you get excited just by improving your pass, you'll spend hours doing it because of that mastery orientation.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into a performance like Tom Brady's, but mastery, I would venture, is a big part of it. So in business, we want high sales, we want big numbers. We call them KPIs, right? I know your audience is mainly entrepreneurs. For my entire career, I've worked for the men, if you will, like large companies, but I love talking to entrepreneurs and small business owners. You have specific goals to make money with your business. And that, in a way, for all of us, there's ego wrapped into it, and that's great, and that's fine. You're on social media, Satya. I would be surprised if you didn't look at your follower numbers and those types of metrics. Okay, I mean, that's fine. In business, though, we forget that the most important goals are not measurable. Are we improving our process? As an entrepreneur, for example, am I running my business the right way? Am I having productive meetings? Am I approaching sales the right way? For you on social media, am I doing this the right way? Is my process, am I preparing well? Am I inviting the right guests? All these process oriented mastery goals aren't necessarily top of mind for a lot of business leaders because they just look at the sales numbers. Again, I'm simplifying. We all do both for sure.
Yes.
But what I argue in the psychology of leadership is just find the balance and tip a little. Most of us are underweighted, to use a finance term. We overweight and underweight assets. Most of us are underweighted mastery goals. In my business, I want to make sure that we get the best research possible. I want to make sure that we run meetings when where there's no groupthink bias. And I need to think about how we get the best out of the team. All mastery concepts.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that. It's just, it's, I mean, further break that down in the sense of where do you think most leaders get it wrong today? I know that is a loaded question. Um, but let's start at the very top. What is the biggest mistake they make? And then, further into somebody actually working towards becoming a good leader, where are their flaws? I mean, let's talk baseline, somebody who really hasn't done the work, and really isn't marching towards this aspect of pushing past, how do I better myself to show up every day for the company and beyond the KPIs and all that kind of stuff, versus somebody who is doing the work but there's still optimization that needs to be had. So those are two different types of audiences.
Yeah, let me address both. First, leaders who are not doing a good job,
Yeah.
but also second, the high performing leaders in the high performing organization, they also are doing typically certain things wrong. And I'll get to that in a second. But it's intuitive for the leaders that aren't performing well, that they get too powerful. And if you're an entrepreneur, you have a lot of power over the people you hire, and they kind of lose their ability to listen. And you know what? One of the top skills in high level leadership, small, medium, large company, is not talking, it's listening. And then that leads you to make wiser decision. It leads people to want to follow you because they feel heard. Not about you, not about talking. It's about listening. These basic things for underperforming leaders, they let their ego get in the way. They think it's about them. They, they will sometimes not treat people well. And they think, okay, if I scream at someone, and maybe sometimes 1% of the time you need to, that's okay. But
Yeah.
they think that just being harsh, impatient, let their emotions drive, short term, you can jolt people into performing, but long term, you want to motivate people to be intrinsically motivated to follow you. So that's poor leadership. And we kind of know what happens there. But what about like high performing leadership? What do high performing leaders get wrong? I will tell you the number one risk for high performing leaders is something documented in the literature in psychology, and it's called goal induced blindness.
Goal induced blindness.
When you get goal induced blindness, this is specific often to high performers. You become so obsessed with your goal, usually a measurable goal, that you lose sight of anything in your life that's not goal related. And that becomes a big problem. That's the goal induced blindness. You might sacrifice your family life. You might sacrifice your personal health. You might sacrifice your sense of ethics. You might start cheating because all you have in your sight is the goal. In literature, people talk about Mount Everest. There's a lot of goal induced blindness that happens on Mount Everest. Did you know that if you want to summit Everest, you have a 4% chance of dying in the process? As a risk manager, I don't like these odds. I don't know why I would take these odds. Some people do. I respect and admire them. But on Everest, people get so obsessed with the summit that they take unreasonable risks. You have to step over frozen dead bodies. Sorry, this is morbid, but to get to the top of Everest,
Yeah,
just to
yeah,
hammer the point here,
yeah.
goal induced blindness on the mountain. So that's the problem with high performing leaders. Often their health starts to deteriorate, they're at risk of burnout. And it happens in athletes as well in a different way, but it's also called goal induced blindness. I like to say, Sasha, it almost sounds like a puzzle, but it's true in my mind. I'm making this statement in a little bit of an extreme way, but Simone Biles improved as a gymnast by watching Netflix on Sundays. Simone
Simone
Biles had
Biles.
goal induced blindness, and the people around her coaching her had goal induced blindness. She's a top gymnast, right? She
Yeah.
goes to the Tokyo Olympics. She's overtrained and she gets something called the twisties, which is when she's in the air, she kind of loses her balance and her sense of space and time, and it's anxiety related.
Yeah.
Famously, she walked out of the Tokyo Olympics. These were in 2021. It was supposed to be in 2020, but occurred in 2021. She caught some criticism for just walking out for her mental health.
I remember
Pure case
this.
of goal induced blindness. She
Yeah.
decided to take care of herself to adjust her goal induced blindness. She would famously tweet about, I'm watching Netflix. It's Sunday. I'm not training. Hey, I got a great night's sleep last night.
Yeah.
And then she came back in 24, won 3 goals, 1 silver, best, most decorated gymnast of all time. So she had goal induced blindness. She addressed it. That's more of a high performer issue. I would bet, Sasha, you have entrepreneurs, small business owners in your audience. I would bet a lot of them, a lot of you all listening, if you look deep into your heart, you might have some version of goal induced blindness.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the story of Simone again, because I think that that's definitely critical and crucial in terms of how people really show up and how we walk through life, and the goal induced blindness, as I had never heard that before, so thank you for that as well, is just really it's so prominent because I think we lose everything on the side as we're just focused. It's almost akin to the horses when they have
Yeah,
that piece that is
blinders.
placed, the blinders, and all they can focus on is in the front. Now that has a very prominent piece to what they're training for and where they're going, and because at the end of the day these are animals and the distraction is very easy, but at the same time it's just this one track focus, and as humans, once we get on that bandwagon, sometimes it's extremely hard to get off. And I love that you said that you can even cheat, and all these different types of characteristics will start to funnel and come up, which is just people morph into something they're not. And it's funny that you bring up entrepreneurs and startups, and having worked with a ton of tech founders, and just being around founders in general. One of the first chapters of my book is Know Thyself, because along the way they have a tendency to make different mistakes. So from an entrepreneur standpoint, the mistakes are hiring mistakes. How much are you willing to let go when you do hire somebody? Are you hiring them just to say that you've hired them, but you're going to do the job for them anyway? I had a client that was making over $15 million a year, and he wanted to see every little Twitter post that was going out and approve it. You're not going to get to 30 million and double your income by doing that. And there's probably a reason why you've been capped at 15 million for X amount of years, right? Now that's a lot of money for somebody, but if he's really trying to push past, what is his limitations? as a business owner myself, I think running a business and starting a business is a mirror into who you are, because you don't know who you're going to be when you start a business. And I think that that portion of it is extremely fascinating, because it's either you're going to recognize the mistakes that you're making that's not helping you get past a certain amount of revenue on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, yearly basis, whatever, and for you to be able to reach your goal. And how do you work through this? How aware of you, or how unaware of it are you, in terms of your limitations as a business owner?
I think that psychology is underrated in that way. Look, we think of
Same.
psychology for its very important role in addressing mental health and treating anxiety and depression. But nowadays, about half the research and the practice of psychology is on the positive side. What makes people thrive? How do you reach high performance? Know thyself. It's a big part of that. Understanding personality psychology. It's a whole world of high performance, of happiness research that I think entrepreneurs, business leaders are completely underestimating, and society maybe is underestimating, because we think, well, I don't have clinical anxiety or depression, so I don't need to be really interested in psychology. Absolutely not. You know what? The top baseball teams now, they all have a sports psychologist on staff.
Yeah.
I like to use this example to hammer the point. Felix Baumgartner, does that name ring a bell, Satya? He's not as well known as he should be. Felix Baumgartner, does
No.
that name ring a bell?
No, not at all.
So here's a daredevil. He did something
Huh.
in 2012 that no human being had ever done. He got in a small capsule attached to a giant helium balloon, and he went up 24 miles to space, just where there's just still a little bit of gravity, so that he could do what he did next, which is unbelievable. And maybe as I recount this, you'll recall, because it was broadcast globally. He got out of the capsule with just a little suit and a helmet. I mean, a technical suit, but not much equipment beyond that.
Sure.
And you know what he did? He skydived.
Oh my God.
He skydived back to Earth from 24 miles. He fell for 10 minutes. No one's had ever done this. Who knew? Like, he could have passed out easily.
Yeah.
He was in free fall for 4 minutes. He's the first human to break the sound barrier without equipment, without an aircraft.
Yeah.
And I tell that story sometimes because Felix Baumgartner, throughout his training and the day of the event, was constantly coached by a sports psychologist. He had the sports psychologist in his ear the day of. He had the sports psychologist helping him visualize and prepare. So now we're talking about, hey, psychology, okay, that's interesting. You can do crazy, ultra high performance stuff if you harness it. That's interesting. And that's interesting everywhere, in the workplace, for entrepreneurs. So that's my pitch. It's my pitch for thinking of the positive side of psychology, the science of high performance, the science of thriving is so fascinating. That's why I wrote The Psychology of Leadership, to bring this to teams and people's lives in the workplace.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating. That's an amazing story, and the intersection of sports into leadership is just incredible in general, and what you can learn from it. You talk a lot about ROTS, so return on time spent. Break
Yeah.
that down for us.
Oh, I love that. So, one of my colleagues is a very, very high performing portfolio manager, one of the best in the business. He introduced me to ROTS, return on time spent. This is what he does. Every 3 months or so, he audits how he spends his time. He builds a spreadsheet, and he'll have different items like doing research, meeting with my team, everything, time with family. And for each of those, he thinks about and scores. It doesn't need to be fully scientific or mathematical, but what he thinks is the return on time spent that aligns with his mission. His mission is to make money for his clients. And he'll cross out things and re-optimize and rank order different activities, how he spends his time under that metric of return of time spent. Now, you don't need to build a spreadsheet and do this all scientifically. You just need to step back, go on a walk, drink some coffee, and think about how you spend your time. Time at work, time reading email. You know what? Time scrolling social media.
Mhm.
It's fine. You need downtime. There is a high return on time spent on downtime. But are you happy? Like, is your downtime getting you a good return? I would argue family
I love
time,
that.
because relationships are so important, actually has a high ROTS from a lifetime happiness perspective.
Yeah.
So
Most of
it's
the
just
people
this,
who spend downtime are not doing things that are making them happy. So it's adding to stress, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So if you put everything in there, just as a thought experiment, if you're a nerd like me, you'll do it in the spreadsheet, whatever. It's just this idea that most of us don't take that. We don't even evaluate how we spend your time. I was asked to speak to a class of high schoolers. They got all the kids together, teenagers that wanted to start a business. They have this entrepreneur club. And they asked me just to speak about my career and give them some advice. And they all want to start a business, right? And they ask me, how do you find the time to do everything we do? We don't have time to start a business. We have schools, we have exams. It's really hard, like work life balance, whatever. And I just looked at all of them and I said, pull up your phone, tell me how many hours you spent this week on average scrolling on social media. And they all looked down like this. And then one raised their hand and said, I spend 5 hours a day. And I just said, if you just X that out, you would have started 3 businesses by now.
Yeah.
Return on time spent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here we are producing social media content.
I know, but we're producing social media content that's of value.
Yes,
That's gonna make somebody stop and think.
I hope.
It's funny because like I have a lot of my friends that are like, oh, I deleted Instagram and so on and so forth, and I'm like, I just upped my algorithm and I love all my friends, but I had to mute you because your life is not what's important to me. What's important to me is waking up in the morning and learning something that I didn't know yesterday. What's one thing that's going to make me smarter today? Following the brands that I love, following influencers, and I'm not talking fashion influencers. I'm talking, world leaders or, somebody that's an author or, a psychologist, things that are of interest to me that I can learn something new and pass that along to somebody else. And I wake up every day and I'm not stressed out because I'm not watching news. I'm not looking at somebody on vacation when I'm doing a ton of work and wishing I was on vacation. So there isn't that, I'm not waking up already with that lack of or that guilt because maybe the whole world is coming to apart and
Yeah.
I'm living a better life than anybody else and so it's the unfolding of the way we choose to navigate certain things, right? Versus we control it versus it controlling us, which I think a lot of people have difficulty doing, for example.
You know what you did? You increased the return on the time spent
Yeah.
because you're getting content that's useful to you.
Yeah. And it brings up my my elevated happiness, I guess. But I did feel down when I was watching other people's lives and their vacations and their this. And I mean, and let's face it, most of the time it's fake content because not that I'm saying that they didn't go to France and take a picture in front of whatever, winery that they were at or so on and so forth, but it's just the idea of nobody sees the work. It's just in entrepreneurship, I mean, you look at an iceberg, you look at a mountain, nobody talks about, like you talked about, going up into I think it was Kilimanjaro that you talked about, but it's nobody talks about the work that it takes to get to somewhere, and we only see the final result, and then we psychologically just shrink that when it could have taken somebody X amount of years to train to get to the top of the mountain, and we
Yeah,
and we don't talk about it.
I talk about social media in the psychology of leadership in the context of the research on social comparison. You know, everyone on average, we spend 10% of our thoughts, according to research, comparing ourselves to other. And the
Yeah,
human brain is wired for social comparison.
yeah,
And the social media platforms I write in the book give you social comparison in concentrated form through your veins.
yeah,
It is built that way. It's unhealthy, and we all have to be careful about it, especially teenagers. I have a teenage daughter. You know, she's struggling. And this is the thing when you talk, and I don't want to get a whole rant about parenting and social media. That's probably a topic for another podcast.
yes,
But as relates to return on time spent, if I ask my 15-year-old daughter how she feels about the return on time spent on social media, she doesn't feel good about it. And people in these companies, they have internal documents that have leaked in the Wall Street Journal that show that they know that.
yeah,
They
yeah,
know it's bad for teens.
yeah.
I'm going to pause here. I'm here to talk about leadership. I'm not going to give a rant. There are positive aspects. It connects people. If you
Yes,
get the
I
right
agree.
content, it's great.
I agree. I agree.
But there are dangers.
Yes, for sure. As with everything, right? I mean, too much chocolate is dangerous. Let's
Yep.
keep it at that. So you also introduce SEE, systemize, encourage, exit. What does that look like in practice?
Okay, so what do you do if you're subject to goal-induced blindness in the business? And a lot of businesses famously, collectively, have had goal-induced blindness. Volkswagen started cheating on their emission scandals. Talk about a blue chip, really good company. Wells Fargo, they started creating fake bank accounts just to increase their metrics. Just to, they had the goal of keeping track of the number of bank accounts open, and on and on and on. So even blue chip, really good companies can suffer from that. If you have CSEE, you systematize, you have red lights that will flash if goal induced blindness starts to seep in. So this could be customer complaints, this could be a survey of employee morale, it could be a whistleblower complaint. Whatever it is, you need to systemize. You need to have a system that takes care of it, because the organization, the human mind, we might not. So going back to Everest, you have an instrument that tells you, it flashes red and it says, look, there's not enough oxygen, the weather's too bad, the air pressure, whatever. I'm not an expert, but you get the idea. Is there's a system in place that sends signal that will help prevent this. Encourage is important because here, you know, um, you're telling people it's okay to raise the alarm bell, and you're rewarding people that identify goal induced blindness. So you see, Sasha, this is kind of how the model works um, in practice to prevent goal induced blindness.
Mhm. Yeah, it's all coming together. You also talk about embracing both introverts and extroverts, and I love this because both sides of the spectrum are brilliant in and of themselves, right? But how should leaders actually think about building high performing teams today through that lens?
Well, the extroverts will dominate meetings, for example. The extroverts aren't bad people. We've gotten to a point where the research on extroversion has tilted in favor of introverts, and it's fashionable in business to say that introverts are undervalued and extroverts are kind of
Yeah.
jerks. And it's really not the case. It's just how we're wired. If you're an extrovert, yes, you like to talk, you get energy from meeting new people. If you're an introvert, you're probably better at like deeper work, more thoughtful. You might actually be a better listener, which ultimately will make you a better leader. There's no right or wrong in any personality trait. It's important in teams, though, to balance this, and it's well researched. sometimes we don't get the most out of introverts because in the workplace, they're not wired for how the workplace works, which is to collaborate towards a common goal. This is what I do, for example, in my steering committee meetings. I have a rule that I call the 1/n rule. N is the number of people in the meeting. What I want, it's not a hard rule, it's a guideline, is everybody to try to contribute 1/n to the discussion. There's two of us right now. Now it's different because it's a podcast, but n would be two, so it would be 50-50. If there's 10 people, you want every member to contribute 10% each of the discussion. We talk about it. We talk about the 1/n rule. If you're an extrovert and you like to think as you talk and you get energy from socializing in the meeting, then you might have to reduce your contribution or your airtime. If you're an introvert, to get to your 1/n, your default might be 0% contribution. I want you to make an effort. I have the pivot method to help bring introverts in. I explain this in the psychology of leadership. You will need to interrupt the extrovert, but you can do that by summarizing their point. That helps a ton because they feel heard. So, John, you were saying, that's a polite way of interrupting because, people were listening. And then you can even apologize. Apologies for interrupting. You were saying. Then you pause and you pivot and you go to Mary, who's been quiet. Mary, what do you think? And as a team leader, you'll see over time, you'll get wonderful, wonderful, thoughtful contributions from the introverts or the people that don't like to talk as much. When I get stuck in a discussion in my leadership team and we're going circles and we're arguing and we're spinning, I call it timeout and I call on someone who's been quiet because usually they're observing. Hopefully they're not distracted. That happens as well. Nothing I can do about that. But even more of a reason to call on them, bring them in the room. They will surprise you. They will help the team get unstuck. Introverts, extroverts, 1/n rule, encourage increased participation from the introverts, decrease. And then you want people to do independent thinking before the meeting. You want people to prepare.
Yes.
And you want people to do some work, bring their views to the meeting. That's also a good way to build diversity of thoughts with introverts and extroverts.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So, burnout. How do you stay ambitious without burning out? I mean, there is a fine line, right? I mean, and we all, even with this whole, do hard stuff things that have come up, in 2025, it's like cold plunge in the morning and do stuff that, it's like so intense for you because then it starts your day off and so on and so forth. And I think, and a lot of that happens, in the US culture, right? Where I think it's like all of a sudden it's this new fad, right? And, let's push ourselves towards this direction. Let's push ourselves towards that direction. And it's like we lose ourselves in the process of all of it. I mean, it's like, this is a completely different track, but it also has viability in the sense of, there was the Atkins diet, now there's the paleo diet, and now there's this diet. And it's just like, how about we talk about the individual and the diet that pertains to that individual that may not necessarily work with a paleo diet or an Atkins diet and so on and so forth. And it's the same thing with burnout and doing hard stuff, as they say, to succeed. What is your track and your thoughts about really building this up aside and aside from all the noise that's happening in our culture and society today?
A lot of burnout is driven by stress and anxiety. The relationship between stress and performance is interesting and in a lot of ways not what people would expect. It turns out from the research in sports psychology or the science of high performance in general that optimal performance does not occur at a stress level of 0. Up to a point, increasing stress will increase your focus and your performance. Up to a point. What happens is when you pass that point of optimal functioning, you're too stressed, you start to choke, your health deteriorates, It's really bad for you. Your appetite goes haywire, your sleep, everything. It'll kill you. But if you think of the stress performance relationship as an inverted U curve, in the literature it's called a Yerkes-Dodson curve. I talk about those in the psychology of leadership. You can stop stressing about stressing and realize at a certain level of what sports psychologists will call activation, because they don't like to talk about stress. They prefer to talk about activation or arousal in the scientific literature. It's how activated you are.
Yeah.
You start embracing it as fuel for performance. You remove the second layer of stressing about stressing. And this is fascinating. It's proven over and over again. If I ask you to run a 100-meter dash and you're super chill about it, you're just completely relaxed, you're not going to run as fast as if the adrenaline is pumping and biologically your focus increases with a certain level of stress.
Yeah.
And your effort, you're actually going to go faster. Now, I know I hear our audience rebuff my arguments right now, saying, I'm already stressed enough, dude. Don't tell me to add to it to increase my performance. I'm already pedaled to the metal. And I understand that. That's the other part of the U. And we can talk about bringing stress down towards the peak, towards optimal performance. But also in some cases, we want to bring it up towards optimal performance. And to me, that relationship is sometimes misunderstood. By the way, going around in life with a stress level of 0 is impossible. It's not part of the human condition. But what you said earlier is true. Different people, you were talking about personalizing diets to different people. Well, your stress diet can be different for different people. Different people have different stress curves. In the book, I talk about Neil Armstrong. When he landed the lunar module, lost connection, ran out of fuel, everything went wrong. He landed it. Most critical moment, you could say, in this part of human history, when he landed on the moon. Well, he was hooked to a heart rate monitor. His heart rate was 75. For a lot of people, that's a resting heart rate. So Neil Armstrong had a different stress curve than you and me. He could deliver ultra high performance at a heartbeat of 75. Okay.
Yeah.
It peaked to 150 when he actually landed. But okay. And some people get overwhelmed really easily, and their optimal functioning will be at a lower level of stress. If you're a leader and you start to understand this in your team and you want to get the best out of the team, you need to realize that different people have different stress curves. And I'll just say one more thing. Different tasks have different stress curves. Now, this is super interesting. My 100-meter dash, you need a lot of adrenaline. You actually need to get really amped up to reach optimal performance. Powerlifters, famously, they smell the salts or whatever it is, like they get all ramped up, like you push. But archery will be very different because your optimal performance at archery will be at a much lower stress level.
Yes.
And so a sport like biathlon is super interesting because you gotta push really hard on the skis, right? Yeah. At a high stress level, at a high adrenaline, high activation. And then you got to lay down and shoot the gun and bring your heart rate down. Yeah. Different tasks have different stress curves.
Oh, I love that. I love that. What a great way to kind of conclude everything, Sebastien. I mean, I think you and I could go on forever.
Did I leave you speechless?
Digging in further and driving into, everything
or lost connection
that is at the intersection between sports and leadership. But before we let you go, and thank you again for the time, but we do what's called like a rapid fire, and I ask you one word, one myth, and one habit. So whatever comes to mind, just please go ahead and fire away. One word that defines great leadership.
Listening.
I like it. One myth about leadership you want to break.
Goal-induced blindness.
So that's a good, that's for me was the best takeaway of this conversation. So thank you. One habit every leadership should adopt.
Sleep.
Yes. Thank you, Sebastian. This has been wonderful. We truly enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you again.
Likewise. Thank you.